The dust hung suspended in the air as the stagecoach rolled to a stop outside McKinney's General Store in Tucumcari, New Mexico Territory, 1878. Ruby Weston stepped down, her threadbare dress and worn leather satchel telling a story her proud posture attempted to deny. She had traveled over 500 miles to escape her past, but the whispers that had followed her from St. Louis seemed to dance on the hot desert wind. "You'll amount to nothing," they had said. "A woman alone has no place out west." Ruby squared her shoulders and marched toward the only boarding house in town, determined to prove them wrong. Tucumcari wasn't much a dusty main street flanked by weathered buildings, where tumbleweeds seemed to have more purpose than half the drifters lounging outside the saloon. But to Ruby, it represented something she desperately needed, a fresh start. "Rooms 50 cents a night," the weathered proprietress of the boarding house said, eyeing Ruby suspiciously, "payment in advance." Ruby counted out the coins carefully, painfully aware that her meager savings wouldn't last long. "I'll need work," she said. "I can sew, cook, clean." The older woman's laugh was harsh. "Honey, this town's got more desperate women than opportunities, but McCaffrey's saloon might take you on." Ruby stiffened. "I'm not that kind of woman." "Then you'd best have another plan," the woman replied, sliding a key across the counter. That night, Ruby sat on the edge of her narrow bed, fighting back tears. She had fled an arranged marriage to a man 3 times her age, convinced that freedom in poverty was better than captivity in comfort. Now, as the coyotes howled in the distance, doubt crept in like the cool night air through the poorly sealed window. Morning brought no relief. After a breakfast she could barely afford, Ruby set out to find employment. Store after store turned her away. The schoolhouse had a teacher. The hotel had maids. No one needed a seamstress. By mid-afternoon, her feet were blistered and her spirit was crushed. It was then that she noticed the sign, "Blacksmith Apprentice Wanted." The shop stood at the edge of town, the rhythmic clanging of metal on metal carrying through the still air. Ruby hesitated only briefly before squaring her shoulders and walking toward the sound. The heat hit her first waves of it rolling from the forge where a tall figure hammered at a glowing piece of metal. Sweat glistened on powerful forearms as the blacksmith worked, seemingly oblivious to her presence. "Excuse me," Ruby called, raising her voice above the noise. The hammering stopped, and the blacksmith turned. Ruby found herself looking into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face both handsome and weathered, like the mountains surrounding Tucumcari, beautiful but unforgiving. "Help you, madam?" he asked, removing a leather work glove to push back a lock of dark hair. I saw your sign," Ruby replied, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look a woman in a faded dress inquiring about blacksmith work. The man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're looking for an apprentice position." "Yes," she said, surprising herself with her own conviction. "I'm stronger than I look, and I learn quickly." A hint of amusement crossed his face, but to his credit, he didn't laugh outright. "Blacksmithing isn't ladies' work, miss." "And what would you suggest is ladies' work in a town where those positions are filled?" Ruby challenged, her desperation overcoming propriety. He studied her for a long moment. "I'm Vaughn Harrington," he finally said. "And you are Ruby Weston." "Well, Miss Weston, can't say I've ever had a woman asking to work the forge before." He gestured to a horseshoe cooling nearby. "Can you lift that?" Ruby stepped forward, wrapped her fingers around the metal, and lifted it easily. "Yes, Mr. Harrington, I can." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or at least curiosity. "Come back tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp. We'll see what you're made of." Ruby nodded, trying to contain her relief. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington, you won't regret it." As she turned to leave, she heard him mutter, "I already do." Dawn hadn't yet broken when Ruby arrived at the blacksmith shop the next morning. She'd spent the night altering one of her few dresses, making it more practical for physical work. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she'd borrowed a pair of men's work gloves from the communal box at the boarding house. Vaughn was already there, stoking the forge. He looked up as she entered, surprise evident in his expression. "Didn't expect you'd actually come." "I said I would," Ruby replied simply. He nodded toward a pile of coal. "Start by filling the forge bin, then I'll show you how to pump the bellows." The work was harder than anything Ruby had ever done. By midday, her arms ached, her back screamed, and her face was streaked with soot. But she didn't complain, not even once. Vaughn worked alongside her, demonstrating techniques, correcting her form, and occasionally glancing at her with what seemed like puzzled admiration. When the lunch hour came, he handed her a canteen of water and a piece of bread with cheese. "Not what you expected, is it?" he asked as they sat in the shade outside the shop. Ruby took a long drink before answering. "It's exactly what I expected, hard work that pays. And what brings a woman like you to Tucumcari, looking for blacksmith work, a woman like me?" Ruby's voice took on an edge. "What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Harrington?" He gestured vaguely at her. "Educated from back east by your accent. Soft hands or they were before today." Ruby stared at her blistering palms. "Perhaps I wanted something different." "Most folks come here running from something, not toward something," Vaughn observed. "Perhaps I'm doing both," Ruby replied. The afternoon passed in a blur of heat, metal, and instruction. Vaughn was a patient teacher, showing her how to hold the tools, how to gauge the heat of the metal by its color, how to strike with precision rather than force. By the time the sun began to set, Ruby could barely stand, but she felt a strange sense of accomplishment. "You did well today," Vaughn said as they cleaned up the shop. "Better than I expected." "Thank you for giving me a chance," Ruby replied. He handed her $2 silver. "Your day's wages. Come back tomorrow if you're not too sore to move." Ruby pocketed the money, more than she'd hoped to earn. "I'll be here." The next few weeks established a routine. Ruby would arrive before dawn, help Vaughn prepare for the day's work, and learn the basics of the trade. She was a quick study, and though her arms trembled with exhaustion each night, she found she enjoyed the work, creating something useful from raw materials. Seeing the respect in the eyes of customers who initially scoffed at a female blacksmith's apprentice, Vaughn remained something of a mystery. He was fair and increasingly respectful of her abilities, but he rarely spoke of himself. Ruby gathered that he had been in Tucumcari for about 5 years, that he had no family nearby, and that he was well respected in town despite keeping largely to himself. One evening, as they were finishing a particularly difficult order for the stagecoach company, Ruby noticed Vaughn watching her as she carefully shaped a metal brace. "You've got good hands," he said quietly. "Steady." Ruby glanced up, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you." "Most apprentices take months to develop that kind of control." "Perhaps I have something to prove," she replied. Vaughn set down his hammer and wiped his forehead with a bandana. "To who?" Ruby hesitated, then decided on honesty. "To myself. To everyone who said I couldn't make my own way." Something flickered in Vaughn's eyes, recognition, perhaps. "I know something about that." Before Ruby could ask what he meant, a commotion outside drew their attention. A rider had galloped into town, his horse lathered with sweat. "Raid," the man was shouting. "Campbell's ranch was hit. Livestock stolen, barn burned." Vaughn was immediately in motion, grabbing his rifle from behind the counter. "Stay here," he ordered Ruby. "I'm coming with you," she countered, reaching for her shawl. "This isn't women's business," he said sharply. "Neither is blacksmithing, according to most," Ruby replied. "I'm not afraid." A tense moment passed before Vaughn nodded reluctantly. "Stay close." They joined the crowd gathering in the street where the rider was providing more details. 4, maybe 5 men, masked. They took 20 head of cattle and shot one of the ranch hands. The sheriff was organizing a posse. "We'll ride within the hour. They can't have gotten far." Vaughn stepped forward. "I'll go," the sheriff nodded. "Glad to have you, Harrington. You're one of the best trackers we've got." Ruby touched Vaughn's arm. "Be careful." Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. "I will. Mind the shop while I'm gone, of course." The posse rode out as dusk was falling, 12 men armed with rifles and determination. Ruby watched from the doorway of the blacksmith shop, an inexplicable fear gripping her heart. In the few weeks she had known him, Vaughn Harrington had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The town felt different with the men gone quieter, more vulnerable. Ruby closed up the shop and returned to her room at the boarding house, but sleep eluded her. She couldn't stop thinking about Vaughn riding into danger. The posse returned 3 days later, fewer than had left. 2 men had been wounded in a shootout with the rustlers. The cattle were recovered, but 3 of the thieves had escaped into the mountains. Ruby was at the shop when Vaughn rode up, his face grim, a bandage visible on his upper arm. She rushed outside, relief and concern warring within her. "You're hurt," she said, reaching toward his arm. "It's nothing," he replied, dismounting carefully. "Bullet just grazed me." Ruby helped him into the shop and insisted on examining the wound. "This needs proper cleaning," she said, noticing the dirt that had worked its way under the hasty bandage. Vaughn watched as she carefully unwrapped the cloth. "You've done this before." "My father was a doctor," Ruby admitted. "I assisted him sometimes." "A doctor's daughter working as a blacksmith's apprentice," Vaughn mused. "There's a story there." Ruby concentrated on cleaning the wound, using whiskey from the bottle Vaughn kept for customers. "My father died 2 years ago. My mother had passed when I was young, with no one to protect me from certain arrangements. I left." "What arrangements?" Vaughn asked, wincing as the alcohol hit his wound. "My father's business partner felt entitled to more than just the practice," Ruby said bitterly. "He was 52, I was 20. When I refused his proposal, he made sure no one in town would hire me. Worthless, he called me. Ungrateful. He told everyone I was damaged goods." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "So you came west?" "As far as my savings would take me," she confirmed, wrapping fresh bandages around his arm. "Tucumcari wasn't exactly my destination of choice." "Yet here you are, proving yourself more valuable than half the men in town," Vaughn said quietly, Ruby's hands stilled at his words. "I'm just trying to survive." "You're doing more than that," Vaughn insisted. "You're thriving. I've seen how quickly you learn, how carefully you work. You have a gift for this craft." Heat rose to Ruby's cheeks, and not from the forge. "Thank you." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Something had shifted, barriers lowered, trust established. Over the next few weeks, they talked more freely as they worked. Ruby learned that Vaughn had fought for the Union in the war, that he had come west afterwards seeking a fresh start, that he had learned blacksmithing from his grandfather. "Why Tucumcari?" she asked one afternoon as they shared lunch. "Needed work." "The previous blacksmith was looking to retire," Vaughn replied, "and it seemed far enough from my past." "What were you running from?" Ruby ventured. Vaughn was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Ghosts," he finally said. "Memories. A family that couldn't understand what the war had done to me." Ruby nodded, not pushing further. She understood all too well the need to leave the past behind. As summer turned to fall, the town began preparations for the harvest festival. It would be a rare day of leisure, with dancing, contests, and a community feast. Ruby found herself looking forward to it with unexpected anticipation. "Will you be attending the festival?" she asked Vaughn as they locked up the shop the night before the celebration. "Hadn't planned on it," he replied. "Not much for crowds." "Oh," Ruby tried to hide her disappointment. "I understand." Vaughn hesitated, then asked, "Were you planning to go?" "I thought I might," Ruby said. "It would be nice to see something of the town besides this shop and my boarding house." Vaughn cleared his throat. "Perhaps I could accompany you, if you'd like the company." Ruby looked up, surprised. "I would like that very much." The next day, Ruby wore her best dress, a blue cotton that brought out the amber in her eyes. She had spent precious time washing and styling her hair, letting it fall in soft waves rather than her usual practical bun. When Vaughn arrived to escort her, she almost didn't recognize him. Gone were the soot-stained work clothes, replaced by clean trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his dark hair. "You look different," Ruby said, suddenly shy. "As do you," Vaughn replied, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "That's a nice color on you." The town square had been transformed with bunting, lanterns, and tables laden with food. A makeshift stage hosted local musicians, and couples were already dancing in the cleared central area. Ruby felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years as she and Vaughn moved through the crowd, greeting neighbors and customers. "Miss Weston," called Mrs. Peterson, the baker's wife. "Is it true you've been working at the forge? My husband says you crafted the hinges for our new oven door." "I did," Ruby confirmed proudly. Well, they're the finest we've ever had, Mrs. Peterson declared. Mr. Harrington must be an excellent teacher. Miss Weston is a natural talent, Vaughn replied. Makes my job easy. The day passed in a pleasant blur of good food, music, and conversation. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. The music slowed and couples moved closer together for a waltz. Would you care to dance? Vaughn asked, extending his hand. Ruby hesitated. I haven't danced in years. Neither have I, he admitted. We can be terrible at it together. She laughed and placed her hand in his. Well, when you put it that way. Vaughn led her to the edge of the dancing area, placed one hand carefully at her waist, and held her other hand in his. They moved awkwardly at first, both out of practice, but soon found a rhythm that worked. Ruby was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his hand at her waist, the scent of soap and leather that clung to him. I never thanked you, she said softly. For what? For giving me a chance when no one else would. Vaughn's eyes met hers. You've more than repaid that small kindness with your work. It wasn't small to me, Ruby insisted. It was everything. The music ended, but they remained standing close, something unspoken passing between them. Then a shout from nearby broke the moment. A group of cowboys had arrived, already deep in their cups and looking for trouble. Look what we have here, one slurred, pointing at Ruby and Vaughn. The blacksmith and his lady apprentice. Vaughn's posture immediately stiffened. Evening, gentlemen. Enjoying the festival, been enjoying the whiskey more, another replied with a laugh. Say, girlie, why don't you show us what other skills you got besides hammering iron? Ruby felt Vaughn's hand tighten on hers. We were just leaving, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Aw, don't go, the first cowboy said, stepping closer. Night's just getting interesting. He reached for Ruby's arm. What happened next was so quick that Ruby barely registered it. Vaughn's fist connected with the cowboy's jaw, sending him sprawling into the dust. The man's companion surged forward, but the sheriff appeared, hand on his pistol. That's enough, he said firmly. You boys best head back to your camp and sleep it off. The cowboys muttered threats but retreated under the sheriff's watchful eye. Vaughn turned to Ruby, concern etched on his features. Are you all right? I'm fine, she assured him, though her heart was racing. Perhaps we should go. They walked in silence back toward the boarding house, the sounds of the festival fading behind them. Ruby was acutely aware of Vaughn's protective presence beside her, the way he positioned himself between her and the street. I'm sorry about that, he finally said as they approached her lodgings. You have nothing to apologize for, Ruby replied. You were defending my honor. Those men had no right to speak to you that way, Vaughn said, anger still evident in his voice. Ruby touched his arm gently. Thank you for defending me. Few have ever done so. Vaughn looked down at her, moonlight silvering his features. Ruby, I. He hesitated, then continued, You deserve better than what this rough place has to offer. I've found some good things here, she said softly. Their eyes held, and for a moment Ruby thought he might kiss her. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently. Good night, Miss Weston. Good night, Mr. Harrington, she replied, a mixture of disappointment and anticipation swirling within her. The following weeks brought an unexpected change to Tucumcari. The railroad announced plans to extend a line through the town, bringing with it the promise of growth and prosperity. Overnight, the sleepy settlement buzzed with speculation and excitement. For Vaughn and Ruby, it meant an influx of work. The construction crews needed tools repaired, specialized equipment fashioned, and horses shod. They worked longer hours, often side by side in comfortable silence, broken only by the sound of hammer on metal. One evening, as they completed a complex order for the railroad foreman, Vaughn paused to watch Ruby put the finishing touches on an iron brace. Her skill had improved remarkably. She worked with confidence and precision. You know, he said, with the railroad coming, I've been thinking of expanding the shop. Ruby looked up, wiping sweat from her brow. That seems wise. We can barely keep up with the orders as it is. I've been considering taking on a partner, Vaughn continued, his voice carefully neutral. Someone with skill who understands the business. Ruby's hands stilled. A partner, Vaughn met her eyes steadily. You've more than proven yourself, Ruby. I'd be proud to have your name alongside mine on the sign. She stared at him, speechless. You want me as your business partner, if you're interested, Vaughn replied. You've earned it. Ruby's mind raced. A partnership would mean security, respect, a permanent place in the community. It was more than she had dared hope for when she'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Vaughn suggested with a rare smile. Harrington and Weston has a good ring to it. Before she could respond, the door to the shop burst open. It was the sheriff's deputy, breathless and urgent. Harrington, there's trouble. A gang's hit the bank, sheriff's been shot. Vaughn was immediately alert. How bad? Bad enough. Doc's with him now. The gang's holed up in the bank with hostages. Ruby felt ice in her veins. How many hostages? 4, the banker, his clerk, and 2 customers, the deputy replied. They're demanding horses and safe passage out of town. Vaughn grabbed his rifle from beneath the counter. I'll be right there. He turned to Ruby. Stay here, please, she nodded, knowing this was no time to argue. Be careful. As Vaughn left with the deputy, Ruby paced the shop, anxiety building with each passing minute. The town had become her home, these people her community. And Vaughn. Vaughn had become something she couldn't quite name but knew she couldn't bear to lose. An hour passed with no news. Then gunshots echoed from the direction of the bank. Ruby ran to the door, heart in her throat, but could see nothing from the shop's vantage point. Unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, she grabbed Vaughn's spare pistol from the drawer and headed toward the commotion. The main street was in chaos. Townspeople gathered behind barricades while armed men positioned themselves around the bank. Ruby spotted the deputy and hurried to him. What's happening? She demanded. Miss Weston, you shouldn't be here, he replied, but his grim expression told her everything she needed to know. Where's Vaughn? She asked, fear gripping her. The deputy hesitated. He went in, offered himself in exchange for one of the hostages, the banker's young clerk. Ruby felt the world tilt. He's in there with the robbers. He knows what he's doing, the deputy assured her, though he didn't sound convinced. Harrington was a scout during the war, if anyone can handle themselves. Another shot rang out, then another. Ruby clutched the pistol tighter, feeling utterly helpless. Suddenly, the bank doors flew open. A woman ran out, the clerk, followed by 2 more hostages. Gunfire erupted from inside and the deputies returned fire. In the confusion, Ruby lost sight of what was happening until a shout went up. They're running out the back. Men rushed around the building. More shots were fired. Then a terrible silence fell. Ruby pushed through the crowd, ignoring the deputy's shout to stay back. She rounded the corner to see 2 bodies on the ground, robbers from their appearance. And kneeling beside a third figure was the town doctor. Vaughn, Ruby cried, recognizing the still form on the ground. She ran forward, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood soaked his shirt from a wound in his side. His face was pale, but his eyes fluttered open at her voice. Ruby, he whispered, told you to stay at the shop. When have I ever done what I'm told? She replied, tears threatening. The doctor was working quickly to stem the bleeding. The bullet went through. If we can stop the blood loss, he has a good chance. You hear that? Ruby said, gripping Vaughn's hand. You're going to be fine. The hostages, Vaughn asked weakly. All safe, the deputy confirmed. You did good, Harrington. They carried Vaughn to the doctor's office, where Ruby refused to leave his side as the wound was cleaned and bandaged. Hours passed as she kept vigil, watching the rise and fall of his chest, praying silently to a god she wasn't sure she still believed in. Dawn was breaking when Vaughn finally stirred, his eyes focusing on Ruby's exhausted face. You're still here, he murmured. Where else would I be? She replied, squeezing his hand. Ruby, he said, his voice stronger now. About the partnership. Hush, she interrupted. We can discuss business when you're recovered. Not business, Vaughn insisted. When I was in that bank, knowing I might not make it out. All I could think about was you. Ruby's heart skipped. Vaughn. I realized something, he continued. I don't just want you as my business partner, I want more than that. Ruby felt tears well in her eyes. I want that too. Vaughn's recovery was slow but steady. Ruby divided her time between tending to him and keeping the blacksmith shop running. The town rallied around them, grateful for Vaughn's bravery and impressed by Ruby's determination to maintain the business in his absence. By the time the first railroad ties were being laid at the edge of town, Vaughn was back on his feet, though Ruby insisted he take on only light work as he regained his strength. They had fallen into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged the growing feelings between them. One evening, as they closed the shop, Vaughn took Ruby's hand. "Walk with me," he led her to the edge of town, where the setting sun painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the light fade from the sky. "When I came to Tucumcari," Vaughn finally said, "I thought I was done with caring about people. The war took something from me, not just friends and comrades, but a belief that life had meaning." Ruby listened, understanding better than most how the past could hollow a person out. "Then you arrived," he continued, determined and proud, refusing to be defined by what others said you couldn't do. "They told me I was worthless," Ruby said quietly, remembering the words that had followed her from St. Louis. Vaughn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "They lied about everything," he said with conviction. "You are the most valuable person I've ever known, not for what you can do, though God knows you've become a finer blacksmith than most men I've met, but for who you are." Ruby felt a tear trace down her cheek. "Vaughn." "I love you, Ruby Weston," he said simply. "I think I have since you walked into my shop and demanded a chance to prove yourself." "I love you too," she replied, the words coming easily, naturally. Vaughn reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I made this," he said, opening his palm to reveal a ring, a delicate band of silver with small copper leaves worked into the design. "It's not gold or diamonds." "It's perfect," Ruby breathed, recognizing the hours of careful work that had gone into crafting something so beautiful. "Absolutely perfect. Will you marry me, Ruby? Be my partner in all things?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the center of town. The entire community turned out to witness the union of the blacksmith and his apprentice turned partner. Ruby wore a new dress of deep green silk, a gift from the townswomen who had come to admire her spirit and skill. Vaughn stood tall and proud in a new suit, his eyes never leaving Ruby's face as they spoke their vows. The celebration afterwards spilled into the street, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. As Ruby and Vaughn swayed together under the stars, she marveled at how far she had come from that desperate young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach less than a year before. "What are you thinking?" Vaughn asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about beginnings," Ruby replied. "How the worst endings sometimes lead to the most beautiful new starts." Vaughn pulled her closer. "This is just our beginning." The railroad's arrival the following month transformed Tucumcari almost overnight. New businesses opened, settlers arrived, and opportunities seemed to blossom like desert flowers after rain. Harrington and Weston blacksmith shop flourished, gaining a reputation for quality craftsmanship that brought orders from as far away as Santa Fe. They expanded the shop, adding a second forge and hiring a young apprentice, a boy of 16 with quick hands and a quicker mind. Ruby took particular pleasure in teaching him, remembering her own desperate plea for a chance. Their home, built on a small plot of land just outside town, became known for its hospitality. Ruby planted a garden that defied the harsh climate, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the unforgiving soil. Vaughn built furniture for their growing household, each piece crafted with the same attention to detail he brought to his ironwork. In the spring of 1880, their first child was born, a son they named Thomas, after Vaughn's grandfather who had taught him the blacksmith trade. Ruby recovered quickly from the birth, and within weeks was back at the forge, baby Thomas sleeping in a cradle Vaughn had fashioned from wood and iron. "He'll grow up knowing his mother is the finest blacksmith in the territory," Vaughn declared proudly, watching Ruby work while their son slept nearby. "And that his father is the most honorable man I've ever known," Ruby added, setting down her hammer to kiss Vaughn softly. Life was not without challenges. The summer of 1881 brought drought that threatened the town's survival. Wells dried up, crops failed, and businesses struggled. Ruby and Vaughn dug deep into their savings to keep their employees paid and their shop open. "We'll weather this," Vaughn assured Ruby one night as they discussed their dwindling resources. We've faced worse. Ruby nodded, thinking of all they had overcome to reach this point. Together, we always do. Their faith was rewarded when autumn brought rain, breaking the drought's hold on the land. The town celebrated with a Thanksgiving feast that united the community in gratitude and relief. As Tucumcari grew, so did the Harrington family. A daughter, Eleanor, joined them in 1882, followed by another son, James, 2 years later. Their home echoed with children's laughter, a sound that healed old wounds neither Ruby nor Vaughn had known still existed. The blacksmith shop became a gathering place of sorts where news was shared, problems solved, and community forged alongside iron and steel. Ruby and Vaughn worked as true partners, each bringing unique strengths to their craft and their life together. Mrs. Harrington, a customer, said one day as Ruby completed his order, "I must admit, when I first heard a woman was working the forge, I had my doubts. But this work is exceptional." "Thank you," Ruby replied, remembering a time when such acknowledgement would have meant everything to her. Now, it was simply a pleasant affirmation of what she already knew. That evening, as they walked home together, Vaughn carrying young James while Ruby held Eleanor's hand and Thomas ran ahead, Ruby felt a contentment so complete it almost overwhelmed her. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked Vaughn. "If you hadn't walked into my shop that day," Vaughn considered, "I'd probably still be there, alone with my hammer and my memories, a half-life at best. And I might have moved on, searching for someplace that would accept me," Ruby mused. "Or you might have given up and gone back east," Vaughn suggested. Ruby shook her head firmly. "Never. I would have rather died than returned to that life." Vaughn shifted James to his other arm and took Ruby's free hand. "Then I'm grateful every day that you found your way to Tucumcari." "As am I," Ruby replied, looking at their children, living proof of the love and life they had built together. Years passed, and the century turned. Tucumcari grew from a dusty frontier town into a respectable railway hub. Ruby and Vaughn expanded their business to include a hardware store alongside the blacksmith shop, adapting to changing times while maintaining the quality craftsmanship that had built their reputation. Their children grew too. Thomas followed in his parents' footsteps, showing an aptitude for metalwork from an early age. Eleanor developed a passion for education, eventually becoming Tucumcari's schoolteacher. James, their youngest, had his father's way with horses and his mother's determination, establishing a successful livery stable by the age of 20. On the 20th anniversary of their marriage, the town held a celebration in honor of Ruby and Vaughn, recognizing their contributions to Tucumcari's growth and prosperity. The mayor presented them with a plaque to be mounted on the town hall, in appreciation of Vaughn and Ruby Harrington, whose skill and character helped forge this community. As they stood before their friends and neighbors, hands clasped together, Ruby remembered the frightened young woman who had arrived with nothing but hope and determination. "I never expected this," she whispered to Vaughn, "to belong somewhere so completely." "You created this," Vaughn replied. "Your courage made it possible." That night, after the celebration had ended and they were alone on the porch of the home they had built together, Ruby rested her head on Vaughn's shoulder. "Do you remember what you said to me that first time I told you about my past?" she asked. "When I said they told me I was worthless, I said they lied about everything," Vaughn recalled, his arm tightening around her. "You were right," Ruby said softly. "Everything I was told couldn't be done. A woman blacksmith, a successful business, a life of my own, choosing all lies." Vaughn kissed her temple gently. "You proved them wrong with every swing of your hammer." "We proved them wrong," Ruby corrected. "Together." As the stars shone over Tucumcari, Ruby Weston Harrington understood that her true worth had never been determined by what others thought of her. It had been there all along, waiting to be forged in the heat of her own determination, and tempered by the love of a man who had seen her value when she herself had barely dared to believe in it. They had built something enduring not just in iron and steel, but in the legacy they would leave to their children and their community. A legacy of courage, of defying expectations, and of the transformative power of believing in oneself and in each other. In the end, That was worth more than all the gold in the West.